your communication.
Thank you so much. Today I'm going to present to you some of the results from recent fieldwork that I conducted in Los Angeles, as Frank said, on data specialists in Hollywood and their role in the definition of creative content offered on streaming video platforms, so the one that are not platforms, such as Netflix, Prime Video, Amazon Prime Video, sorry, Disney Plus, and the likes. And just as a brief introduction, I would like to say a word about how I came to study Hollywood data specialists and about the method that I used. So as you all know, streaming has become the main distribution channel for television products. So I'm going to be speaking about film and TV. Yeah. So about the main distribution channel for TV products, and in fact for audiovisual products in general, including film, which has been accelerated but not caused by the COVID crisis. The leading streamers, now Netflix and Amazon Prime Video, have huge amounts of users and subscribers, and these initial streamers that launched more than 15 years ago now are also now in competition with the many services that have been launched more recently by traditional studios and networks, from Disney Plus to Max and smaller competitors such as Paramount Plus, Apple TV Plus, Peacock, and so on. Just as an illustration, I'm not sure if you can read or if it's too small, but I hope that you can see some of it. This is a chart where you can see the various players by date by launch date. So it's just to illustrate my point in this brief introduction. In the expansion of streaming, a turning point, I use streaming to talk about video, streaming video services that curate content. So in their expansion, a turning point has been the years 2012, 2013, when the major streamers began to produce original content in addition to their distribution activities. They invested massively in original production. Between 2013 and 2021, Netflix alone produced over 1,600 titles and became the leading film production studio. In these new major production organizations in Hollywood that the streamers have become, data specialists of various types have emerged on the content side of these organizations. Over the past decade, they have become an important occupational group, and today they represent thousands of employees in these organizations. Their role is to collect and process user behavior data and to connect it with categories and subcategories of content consumed with the aim of predicting the success of potential new projects. So the aim is to influence decisions, creative decisions, or production choice decisions, decisions that are about what is to be acquired or be made. So they are very closely involved in the definition and the manufacture of content. Although their presence has been noted, these professionals have not yet been the subject of systematic sociological analysis, empirical analysis, sociologically. Over the last 10 years or so, there has been a proliferation of work on how streaming, video streaming organization have transformed the distribution, the production, and the consumption of content. But the studies have often focused on recommendation algorithms, and they are used by audiences. They have also been part of a larger research trend that focuses on the development of the power of metrics, the massive collection of personal data, and the new forms of algorithmic power and algorithmic governance that has emerged. Even though some researchers such as Dominique Cardon and others have insisted on the need to take seriously to take data work and data workers seriously. Very few studies have in fact been devoted to the details of the activity of these professionals that are behind the power of data and behind the making of algorithms. Those who build these tools and frame the way in which they can be used by others. So that has been what precisely interested me. And this is why I conducted this fieldwork. So I'm going to now just say a word about the fieldwork and methods that I used. I conducted 77 in-depth interviews between 2017 and 2023, both in person in Los Angeles and by video conference, because as you can tell, in this time period, 17-23, there was this big thing called COVID. So during the COVID crisis, it had to be a video conference. I interviewed different categories of data specialists. I use data specialist and not data scientist on purpose because it's different categories of players. I will tell you more. So I interviewed data specialists who work for the streamers, studios, independent production companies, companies that specialize in content analytics, as well as talent agencies. And I also interviewed some of their direct counterparts on the production side of these organizations. And then building trust over time with these interviewees allowed me to conduct in situ observations as well. One was conducted in Los Angeles in March, April 2022, where I was able to observe the activity of a team carrying out data-driven content analysis to evaluate TV projects, TV shows, or projects that were potentially going to develop into TV shows and recommend inflections to their content. And I also shadowed a data scientist working for one of the major most well-known established streamers. I repeatedly observed this activity between the spring of 2022 and the summer 2021 and the summer of 2022. So I can, if you're interested, tell you more about that fieldwork aspect during the Q&A. For now, I'm moving directly to my second point, which is how data specialists emerged and made their mark on the content side of Hollywood. How did they gain a foothold on the content side? So following the launch of the three initial streamers that are Amazon, Prime Video, Netflix, and Hulu between 2006 and 2008, these streamers quickly signed contracts with the major studios for the distribution of their products because their purpose, the issue was that they needed to build their initial library of content. So initially, the studios saw this as an opportunity to distribute at lower cost part of their content that they did not see necessarily as very promising in terms of box office, for instance, while at the same time positioning the studios on the digital market that no one really understood at the time. They knew that they needed to be present, but they didn't really know what it was or how. But the studios, faced with the growth and success of the streamers, soon perceived them as competitors and gradually wanted to withdraw their content. So these withdrawals of content took place massively in the second half of the decade 2010, the 2010s. But because of the duration of the distribution contract, it was mostly towards the end of the decade. So for instance, in 2018, Netflix suddenly lost about 20% of its library. This pushed the streamers, this loss of content, pushed the streamer to invest heavily and quickly in original production to compensate this loss of content, because you cannot afford not to have content. It's a game, it's a volume game. You have to give the impression to the consumer that it's endless possibilities that you're offering. So again, another illustration of this. Here you can see Netflix library of content shrinking in the second half of the decade. despite the massive investment in original production that you can see in the columns about original production. It's this commitment to original production by the initial streamers that led to the creation of the first data specialist positions designed to operate on the content side at these organizations, mostly Amazon and Netflix. For the leaders of these companies that were born from the tech world or Silicon Valley, integrating data specialists into decision-making processes was not in itself considered as disruptive or unusual, but it was perceived as a coup de force by Hollywood professionals who attach kind of a sacred dimension to creative choices that are associated with making arts. As a result, the organizational structure of the tech streamers that are Netflix and Amazon differ from that of traditional studios in terms of the position occupied by data specialists in the project decision-making chain, as well as in the economic and symbolic hierarchies of these organizations. Data specialists are involved very early on in the content definition and production process when it comes to deciding which shows or film to buy or to produce. On a day-to-day basis, they are important counterparts for those responsible for content acquisition, who are traditional producers for the most part, that the streaming services have hired often by poaching them initially from the major studios or successful independent companies. For these traditional producers or production executives or content executives who had no particular training or affinity with data analytics, interacting with data scientists, with engineers, with technicians, busy building algorithmic models was a challenge. It was absolutely not obvious. And understanding their language or their way of thinking was not self-evident. The role of middleman or intermediary, if we want to use this word, I think we should know between what and what, what they intermediate. So the intermediary role between those two types of employees, the data scientists on one hand, and the traditional Hollywood producers on the other hand, this middleman and woman role has been devolved to new specialists whose positions are variously labeled in these organizations. They can be content analysts, content strategists, content planning specialists, but these intermediaries, always play a key role in defining content strategy and assessing the economic value of project. The content analyst that I'm going to quote now described his activity as follows during our interview. So you will be, so you can see how this is an intermediary role. We work very closely with content executives in helping them make decisions on how to program the service and which content to select for either production or acquisition or license. So we are between the more hardcore scientists and the end user of the data that are the content team. So the typical process in a show would be, we get a pitch idea for the show, the creative executive get excited about the idea, they think it's a great idea, they send it to us, we run the models, we try to estimate how big the show could be, and then based on that, plus other strategy consideration, we tell the executives, hey, we think it is a good idea or not a good idea. And we work with them in basically the decision of, do we make it or not? What's the price that would be best for it? So as a result, there is a closely interdependent system, in fact, formed by data science units on one hand and content analysis departments on the other hand inside the streamers, and that their collaboration has become key in defining production choices, or at least in influencing production choices. So here on this chart, which is HBO Max before it became just Max, but you can see the content planning and analysis unit kind of sitting in between the data science unit that is here on the right, and the content acquisition original production unit, which is a traditional producer, where the traditional producers are. And another one, which in fact shows kind of the same thing, but it looks different, is Netflix. And at Netflix, I have represented the data team in blue here, and the content strategy planning analysis team here in red. And it kind of intermediates, it connects data science to content acquisition and production in studios, even though there could be direct connections as well. But for the most part, it goes through the red box of the content strategy planning and analysis team. So in addition to the development of these teams on the content side, which did not exist on the content side before, and the fact that you have this intermediary group of data specialists that are not technically data scientists, in addition to that, these departments, meaning data science and content analytics, have been growing extremely fast in recent years. If I take Netflix as an example, at Netflix, when they began producing original content in 2013, the company had just 2 data scientists, 2 people working on the content side. By the end of 2018, the team formed around this initial core had grown to 50 people. 3 years later, 2021, they had 150 data scientists dedicated to content alone on the content side. And by the summer of 22, this group was merged under the authority of a new VP with the consumer insights team and totaled 400 people. At the same time, the red box, the content planning and analysis team, which interfaces more directly with the traditional production professionals, also grew. In 2012, 2013, there were 15 people in that short team that was just started, launched. And then it expanded very rapidly with over 90 employees by the summer of 2019 and no less than 500 by the spring of 2022. So between these 2 moments, 10 years apart, they went from just a few people, literally, to 900 people working on content, data for content in 2022. And that also happened, although in slightly lesser, to a slightly lesser extent, within Netflix competitors. This leads me to the third and last point that I wanted to develop, which is the shifting contours of what I call evaluation communities. After the COVID crisis, the distinction between studios and streamers started to rapidly erode. Streamers first became studios in the sense that they started producing, and they were kind of the new majors, in a way, at the center of the production game. But then studio also turned into streamers, as you know, by systematically developing their own video-on-demand services, with the notable exception of Sony. To understand the scale of this change, we need to remember that production companies and studios were not traditionally consumer-facing organizations. Until recently, they had very little data on the audiences for their movies. And above all, more importantly, they didn't really seek to collect and construct such data. The audience was not directly their problem, but it was, for the most part, the problem of the exhibitors. A vice president of a studio described this situation during our interview. I quote, "I, in the theatrical space, have no relationship with the consumer. I am a wholesaler. The exhibitor is a retailer. They have the transaction with the consumer. So I have no idea who opens my movie on D1, who comes first weekend, who second weekend, second, third weekend. I don't know who comes, say, at 5 p.m. I don't know if a consumer goes to one theater for one type of movie and a different cinema for a different type of movie. I don't know who cross-consumes my movie with Disney's Adventures or Universal Minions. So we, as a category, have very little data. We decide what we make. I put very little information into a greenlight process, even on sequels. So we decide what we make, when we make it, how and when it's released. The consumer has no say in this. Now, by launching their streaming services, studios have started selling directly to the consumers, that's the direct-to-consumer model, and having access to the associated user behavior data, potentially, in any case, because the possibility or the potential opportunity to collect data and use it to transform decision-making processes did not immediately or automatically translate into new practices or into organizational changes at the studios that would have immediately made them similar to Netflix or Amazon. The case of Hulu, which, as you may know, is a streaming service, because we don't have it here in France, a streaming service created by a coalition of studios, illustrate the initial resistance of these organizations, the studios, to the use of data to define content. It took a lot longer for a data science unit to emerge there, and its scope of intervention in creative decisions remained much more limited for a long time. This revealed the persistence of shared belief in Hollywood about creative mechanisms and the professionals who are legitimate to drive these creative processes and creative choices. And these beliefs, or these beliefs, assigned to producers, content executives, and studio heads a monopoly over creative decisions and the greenlight process. The power of this production professional is tied to their relationship with the artists, who are believed to have an aesthetic and emotional connection with their audience. And therefore, they are seen as the one in a position to say what the viewers will want to see and what should be offered to them, what should be made. This is the traditional Hollywood model. The producers know better because they have the connection with the talent. The negotiation of projects in Hollywood traditionally has also involved talent representatives who, like production professionals, claim a sense of talent, something of an intuition, an intuitive ability to spot the right projects, to know what will work. That's their predictive mechanism. In my previous work on talent agents, I analyzed the activity of what I called evaluation communities, bringing together talent representatives, artists, and production professionals. These evaluation communities are stable networks, relationship cycles within which artistic careers are shaped and the existence and the value of projects are decided. So here you can see how I represented evaluation communities in one of my previous books on talent agents and agencies. The talent representatives are kind of bigger than they should be. In this, it's because it was in a book about agents and agencies, but the reason why I show it now is because you can see the interaction between the three major type of actors in evaluation communities that are talent representatives, production professionals, and the talent, which appears on that part where it says artist. I don't know if you can really see that, I hope. What is important in any case, and my point here and now, is that the rise of data specialists on the content side of production organizations mean that these evaluation communities, the places, the cycles, the networks within which artistic careers are shaped and projects are picked and are decided, these evaluation communities are changing. They are being reconfigured as a new category of player enters them. Of course, I am not saying that traditional studios were completely preserved from any form of quantification or any attempt to rationalize decision-making processes before. There were number specialists at the studios before, they were not absent, but they remained, and to some extent, they still remain, because these people still exist, confined to position in the marketing and research departments, which means that they only intervened, and at the end of the process, once a film or a show has been greenlit and has been also made, has been produced for the most part, when the time comes to promote it, that's when the marketers come into play. Because they are excluded from the moment of the green light, the sacred moment of the creative decision, they occupy a position that is dominated or more subaltern in symbolically speaking, because in the studio hierarchy, because it's deemed less creative. These past few years, some of the top executives in these departments, marketing, research departments, have developed strategies to take advantage of the upheaval that the expansion of streaming has represented and the challenges posed to the studios by the so-called streaming revolution. And the specialists, they in fact operated in the only department within the studios whose expertise was precisely to collect and process data, or at least numbers. It wasn't called data. So within the studios, they monopolized the ability to speak the language of numbers and data, and they have capitalized on these skills to reinvent their role and rise to a more valued place in the studio hierarchy. So some of them have been at the forefront of the new streaming services launched recently by the studios. As a result, there has been objective alliances between different categories of numbers professionals operating at the legacy studios on one hand, at the streamers on the other. And in recent years, these professionals have also circulated now between positions offered in these various organizations, gradually forming a group that tends now to share common experiences, skills, standards. All of that is in the process of happening, but the tendency is that gradually a new occupational group is emerging in Hollywood. So within the evaluation communities where the fate of film and TV project is decided, different category of data specialists are now in competition with those who used to monopolize the authority to speak on behalf of the audience or audiences. What is at stake here is to know who can legitimately and effectively say what the consumer wants. Is it the producer on the basis of relationships with artists and their representatives, or is it the data specialists and those who mobilize the authority of numbers and algorithms to influence what should be produced and distributed? The claim to speak on behalf of the audience appears in the words of this data scientist in a senior position at one of the dominant streamers that I interviewed. I'm just gonna jump to the end of the quote because I don't have a lot of time left. We definitely think that what we do is lending a voice to the member, and what the members are doing, it is definitely one way to think about consumers coming to the table as part of the decision-making process. What is at stake here for data scientists and analysts is to be associated as closely as possible. It's their influence. It's to be associated as closely as possible with the green light process, to gain influence, carving out a place for themselves in evaluation communities. The head of a data team at a studio that launched its streaming service clearly formulated this objective by saying the ultimate goal is for my team to have a seat at the table with the creators, with the studio partners, and letting them feel like they get additional value from our team to help them take those creative decisions. So we have a new category of professionals, and this is my final conclusive sentence, a new category of professionals that now influence creative choices, who come from a very different background and professional socialization compared with the traditional production professionals in Hollywood who have been around for a long time. And this is also consequential because their perception of what is at stake, their perception of the creative process, their perception of their job and of what is made in Hollywood is very different. There are methods also for deciding what should be made, and the sort of horizon of reference that comes with it are also very different. So that affects the content that's being made, that affects the choices. I don't really have a lot of time to tell you more, but I will be happy to discuss it with you during the Q&A. Thank you so much.